In the heart of New York's elite marble art house, Emily Carter is merely a shadow, an administrative assistant whose quiet competence masks a burning, hidden artistic genius. Her disciplined life of filing documents and serving wealthy patrons shatters the day arrogant real estate titan Richard Steele humiliates her, publicly dismissing her entire understanding of art. Forced to confront his sneering challenge in front of a captivated crowd, Emily must choose between maintaining her protective invisibility or unleashing a raw, furious 5-minute painting that will either destroy her career or redefine her life. If you liked the video and have subscribed to my channel, let's move on to our story. Enjoy watching. The Marble Art House was less a gallery and more a shrine. Its main showroom, a vast echoing cathedral of high culture commerce, was all polished Carrara marble floors and soaring black steel trusses. Light, filtered through a massive skylight, didn't so much illuminate the space as it consecrated the artworks, bathing the million-dollar canvases and priceless sculptures in an ethereal glow. For Emily Carter, however, the shrine was just an office. At 25, Emily possessed a quiet, almost deliberately understated presence that was ideally suited for her role as the senior administrative assistant to the gallery's owner, Mr. Elias Vance. Her uniform, a sleek, charcoal gray suit, was a professional camouflage. It allowed her to glide seamlessly through the high-stakes environment, always carrying a sheaf of confidential appraisals, a crystal tumbler of sparkling water for a demanding collector, or a slim, leather-bound folder detailing the provenance of an auction piece. She was a necessary ghost, a piece of expertly polished functional machinery that ensured the gallery's immaculate facade never cracked. Emily, the insurance writer for the new Hearst acquisition, needs to be signed before lunch. And make sure the courier for the Rothko is routed through the discreet entrance. We don't need a public spectacle, Mr. Vance, a man whose taste was only rivaled by his arrogance, would instruct without looking up from his mahogany desk. Yes, Mr. Vance, Emily would reply, her voice a low, efficient murmur. She was a walking, talking document carrier, a high-fidelity answering service, and a human GPS for visiting dignitaries who inevitably got lost between the minimalist wing and the restrooms. The irony, sharp and persistent as a paper cut, was that Emily didn't just understand the art she handled, she lived it. She knew the chemical composition of the pigments, the psychological tension in a de Kooning stroke, and the structural integrity necessary for a bronze sculpture to stand for centuries. Her job, however, required her to suppress this knowledge, to reduce every magnificent work of human ingenuity to a SKU number and an insurance premium. The gallery staff mirrored the clientele's perception. The junior curator, a perpetually anxious man named Julian, often joked, "Emily, darling, you know where the good coffee beans are, but you probably couldn't tell a Monet from a Manet." The security guards and even the other administrative staff saw her as the most reliable and least interesting person in the room. They praised her efficiency, her punctuality, her ability to file documents by color code, but never her depth of thought or her creative spark. They saw the dust on the marble, never the life beneath the surface. This underestimation was her heavy, silent companion through the 9-to-5 grind. But outside the polished, echoing silence of the Marble Art House, Emily's life was a different study in light and shadow. Her tiny apartment, perched on the 4th floor of an ancient brownstone in Brooklyn's Bushwick neighborhood, was a sanctuary of controlled chaos. It was small, one main room that served as a kitchen, dining room, and living space, but it was dominated by a single glorious fact. It was also her studio. The air in the apartment was thick and intoxicating, a rich blend of linseed oil, turpentine, and the faintly sweet aroma of freshly stretched canvas. Unlike the pristine, dust-free world of the gallery, here the walls were spattered with accidental color, the wooden floor was scarred with dried drips of cerulean blue and burnt umber, and the light from the single large window was constantly shifting, forcing her to see the world in new values. She didn't paint on an easel. Instead, she had rigged a heavy counterweighted pulley system that allowed her to suspend her canvases horizontally, about 3 feet off the floor. This was her signature technique. It allowed her to move around and above the work, creating a visceral, almost aggressive engagement with the surface. Every night, after shedding the suffocating charcoal suit and slipping into a pair of paint-splattered jeans and an old, oversized flannel shirt, she transformed. The quiet, efficient assistant vanished. In her place was a woman possessed by a feverish, almost desperate energy. Her subject matter was almost exclusively abstract portraiture. But she didn't paint faces, she painted emotions. She used thick impasto strokes, applying the paint with knives, rags, and the sheer force of her own frustration. A single furious red slash across a field of soft gray could represent a week of suppressed anger at Mr. Vance. A dizzying, swirling vortex of deep purple and startling yellow might capture the exhausting cycle of balancing a high-pressure job with a suffocating desire for recognition. She never showed her work. The pieces, once finished, would be leaned carefully against the wall, joining a silent, vibrant assembly of her own personal history. They were her rebellions, her confessions, her screams, all perfectly hidden from the world that judged her based on the cleanliness of her folders and the speed of her steps. One evening, as she finished a piece, a riot of cobalt blue and electric green that she had named the undervalued current, she stepped back, her chest heaving slightly. The exhaustion of the day, of being invisible, finally lifted, replaced by the profound, private satisfaction of creation. She looked at the clock. It was 2 a.m. In less than 6 hours, she would have to put on the suit, smooth her expression, and return to the marble prison where her talent was a non-existent variable in the equation of her life. One day, she whispered to the canvas, her voice cracking with the promise, one day they will see more than just the dust. She cleaned her brushes meticulously, a ritual of respect for her tools, her only allies in this double life. As she drifted off to sleep, the scent of oil paint clung to her, a secret, protective aroma that kept the cold, expensive air of the marble art house at bay. The next morning, the ritual reversed. The paint was washed from her hands, her hair was pulled back into a severe ponytail, and the suit went on. She grabbed her laptop bag, which contained not a single sketch or tube of paint, and walked out into the bustling New York morning, stepping back into the role of Emily Carter, the document carrier. She was ready for another day of silence, ready to be underestimated. But today a shift was coming. Today an arrogant man named Mr. Steele was scheduled to visit the gallery, and the world of polished marble was about to collide violently with the world of passionate dust. The perfect storm for a silent, unexpected rebellion was brewing, and Emily, the unassuming assistant, was about to be caught right at its terrifying, necessary center. The arrival of Mr. Richard Steele was less an entrance and more an invasion. He didn't simply walk into the marble art house. He occupied it, his presence immediately disrupting the gallery's meticulously cultivated atmosphere of hushed reverence. Steele, a titan of New York real estate whose empire stretched from midtown Manhattan skyscrapers to sprawling waterfront developments, was a man accustomed to having his net worth precede him, clearing the path like an invisible vanguard. He was a study in aggressive affluence. A bespoke charcoal Brioni suit, a watch that likely cost more than Emily's annual salary gleaming under the gallery lights, and an overall demeanor of absolute, unquestioned entitlement. He didn't view art as an expression of the human spirit. He viewed it as a movable asset, a tangible, color-coded signifier of his superior standing in the urban hierarchy. Mr. Vance, the gallery owner, rushed to meet him, a rare and telling show of deference. Mr. Steele, a true pleasure. We've curated a small selection of abstract expressionists we think will complement your new penthouse in Tribeca. Steele didn't offer a handshake, merely a curt nod, his gaze already sweeping the room, calculating square footage and ROI. Vance, he drawled, his voice a gravelly monotone that carried easily across the marble floor. I trust you haven't wasted my time with anything challenging. I need investment pieces, not graduate student experiments. Emily, meanwhile, was strategically trying to be less visible than usual. Her task was to manage the digital inventory on a tablet, confirming the provenance and latest auction values of the pieces Mr. Steele might show interest in. She shadowed Mr. Vance at a respectful, almost gravitational distance, her fingers moving silently over the screen. As Steele moved from a bold, geometric piece by an emerging Cuban artist to an established, almost aggressively muted Rauschenberg, his commentary was a relentless stream of dismissive, transactional appraisals. This one, he said, pointing at a $2 million canvas with a dismissive wave of his hand. Too blue. Doesn't match the granite in the master bath. Aesthetically worthless for my purposes. Ah, but Mr. Steele, Vance interjected, his smile strained, consider the historical context. This piece marked a pivotal shift in the artist's mid-career, a move away from figurative work and toward a pure exploration of color theory. Steele merely sneered. Context doesn't pay the bills, Vance. Liquidity pays the bills. Don't talk to me about color theory. Talk to me about the 3-year appreciation curve. This was the nature of the beast. A man who saw value only in the dollar sign, not the hours, the struggle, the inherent human connection poured onto the canvas. Emily held her breath, biting back the dozen corrections and historical insights that sprang to her mind. The colors aren't just blue, they're phthalocyanine blue, a pigment known for its depth, and the texture is a direct reference to his early collage work, she thought, but the words were a silent, locked-away rebellion. It was when they paused by a monumental, textured work by a deceased American master that the inevitable collision occurred. Emily had been told to bring a small antique teak tray with a fresh bottle of artisanal spring water and a clean, crystal tumbler. Mr. Steele had a specific brand preference. As she approached, navigating the edge of a velvet rope, Mr. Steele turned abruptly, his face a mask of slight irritation. He was mid-sentence, loudly declaring the piece underrated only because the artist died before the market could fully capitalize. His eyes settled on Emily. The shift in his expression was immediate and jarring. The intensity he reserved for negotiating multi-million-dollar deals vanished, replaced by a vague, generic condescension. He didn't see the assistant, he saw the service. "You," he commanded, his voice dropping slightly, the kind of casual imperative a person uses when addressing an inanimate object or an employee whose name they don't need to remember. Emily froze, holding the tray steady. "Yes, Mr. Steele? Is this water cold? And is it the Voss? Don't insult me with that generic bottled tap you serve the tourists." He didn't wait for an answer, his eyes already flicking back to the artwork, his attention already dismissed. "Go ahead, pour it. And make sure you don't smudge the glass. I hate fingerprints." Emily carefully placed the tray on a nearby pedestal, strictly against gallery rules, but she wasn't about to argue with the donor of the moment, then poured the water with a steady hand. Every movement was precise, practiced, and imbued with a quiet dignity he was too blind to see. He took the glass from her without looking. "Thank you," he said, but the inflection was closer to begone than "I appreciate your service." He treated her as if she were a silent, uniformed automaton, a server in an exclusive restaurant or a cleaner at a resort, anything but an intelligent human being standing feet away from art that she understood on a molecular level. Mr. Vance, relieved that the distraction was over, quickly jumped back into the conversation. "Now, Mr. Steele, about the provenance of this piece." But the damage was done. Emily, standing at the periphery, felt the familiar burn of invisibility turn into a cold, hard ember of anger. It wasn't just the humiliation of being reduced to a waiter, it was the sheer, breathtaking arrogance of a man who stood in a temple of creativity and saw nothing but financial instruments. She wanted to scream. She wanted to point to the painting he was critiquing and articulate the artist's desperate struggle with mortality that the colors so beautifully conveyed. Instead, she straightened her charcoal suit, smoothed her expression back into the mask of the efficient assistant, and retreated 2 paces. She was just a document carrier, a servant of the commerce, and in the world of Marble Art House, that was her only permitted role. Mr. Steele took a long, cool sip of his Voss water, completely oblivious to the small tectonic shift that had just occurred in the assistant standing near him. He was ready to find the next artwork to dissect. Emily, in turn, was now primed for the next interaction, the one where she would accidentally finally break the silence. The tension was coiled tight, ready to spring. The group had moved into the contemporary wing, a space of severe white walls and cold, industrial lighting. Mr. Steele stood before a large-scale triptych by the reclusive artist known as Ether, a work composed entirely of layered black and deep navy geometric shapes. The piece was famous not for its visual complexity, but for its intense, almost spiritual minimalism, which demanded quiet contemplation. Mr. Steele, naturally, was contemplating nothing of the sort. He paced the polished floor, phone pressed to his ear, loudly discussing a property deal, his voice a jarring intrusion on the work's inherent silence. When he finally ended the call, he turned to Mr. Vance, gesturing dismissively at the towering canvas. "Vance, this is what I mean by challenging. It's pretentious. It's 3 slabs of black paint. I could have a crew paint this wall for $100, he announced, the arrogance in his voice amplified by the room's acoustics. A small cluster of other wealthy patrons and one nervous-looking art blogger instantly shifted their attention to the conversation. drawn to the spectacle of a man trying to buy his way into cultural literacy. Mr. Vance, desperate to salvage the sale, leaned in conspiratorially. "Ah, but Mr. Steele, that's where the value lies." The critical theory surrounding ether argues that the absence of color is the statement. It's an exercise in reduction, a commentary on the visual overload of the modern city. It's an intellectual investment. Our appraisal places this piece at 8 figures. Steele scoffed, circling the work like a predator. Reduction? No. It's a blank space that the critics invented meaning for so they could charge someone like me a fortune. The true value of a painting, Vance, is in the complexity, the verifiable skill that goes into it. If I can't see the sweat, the brushwork, the hours of effort, then it's just a commodity. This, he concluded with a theatrical wave toward the black void, is a market bubble waiting to pop. It's art for people who want to sound smart, not people who are successful. At that precise moment, Emily was gliding past, attempting to execute the delicate maneuver of retrieving the Hearst appraisal folder she'd inadvertently left on a marble bench near the wall. She was moving with the practiced invisibility of her trade, her mind entirely focused on her next task. But Steele's words, particularly the dismissive, generalized swipe at the entire discipline of abstract art and the explicit demand for verifiable skill, struck a raw, exposed nerve. It was the distillation of everything she despised about the gallery's transactional, shallow culture. Her hands, reaching for the folder, involuntarily paused. Before the rational, professional part of her brain could intervene, the part that screamed, "Do not speak, you are an employee, you are invisible," a quiet, authoritative voice entirely unlike her usual low murmur, escaped her lips. Actually, the texture in the central panel suggests the artist used a mixture of quartz sand and bone glue in the gesso. Emily interjected, her gaze fixed on the painting's surface, not the man. Her voice was quiet but precise, cutting through the bombast of Steele's pronouncements like a surgeon's scalpel. The black isn't just black. It's a carbon black pigment applied wet on wet, which creates a light-absorbing surface that forces the viewer's eye inward. It's not about visual overload, it's about sensory deprivation as a meditative act. You're right that it demands silence, but not because it's simple. Because it's intensely, technically difficult to make nothing so compelling. The silence that followed was instant, absolute, and heavier than the massive triptych itself. Mr. Steele froze, his crystal tumbler mid-lift, the water momentarily forgotten. Mr. Vance's face, already pale from the stress of the negotiation, went slack with horror. The small crowd of onlookers blinked, their attention completely diverted from the multimillion-dollar artwork to the unlikely source of the highly intelligent critique, the young woman in the charcoal suit who usually fetched coffee. Steele slowly turned to face Emily, his eyes narrowing to slits. His surprise rapidly congealed into a venomous contempt. He was not just interrupted. He was corrected publicly by the lowest-ranking person in the room. His authority, his curated image as the ultimate connoisseur, had been subtly but devastatingly challenged. Did you just offer an opinion?" Steele asked, his voice dangerously low. He took 2 slow, deliberate steps toward her, forcing her to look up and meet his gaze. Emily felt a deep flush rise to her cheeks, the public humiliation threatening to overwhelm her. She had broken the primary rule of her employment: never be seen, never speak out of turn. Yet, beneath the shame, a stubborn defiance was taking root. She refused to apologize. "I merely offered a technical clarification, sir," she replied, her voice firmer this time, though still measured. Steele let out a harsh, barking laugh that grated against the room's expensive stillness. He addressed the small audience, gesturing toward Emily with the hand holding the water glass. "Listen to this. A technical clarification, from the administrative staff." He shook his head in mock pity. "Vance, you run a tight ship, but apparently not tight enough. Does she know what she just contradicted? She contradicted Richard Steele, the man who could buy and sell this entire room before lunchtime." He focused his full, withering attention back on Emily, his eyes cold and devoid of anything resembling respect. "Let me be perfectly clear, assistant," he spat the title out like a curse. "Your job is to carry documents and fetch the correct brand of chilled water. Your opinion on the technical difficulty of Ether's gesso application is not only irrelevant, it's ridiculous. You are paid to manage files, not to understand the philosophical lineage of post-war abstraction." He leaned closer, delivering the final, crushing blow. The very line that defined the chasm between them. "An assistant like you has no idea what art even is." The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. They weren't just a professional slight. They were a complete dismissal of her soul, her passion, her talent, and the long, solitary nights she spent covered in the creative dust of her own apartment. She wasn't just wrong, she was incapable of being right because of her status. Mr. Vance, recovering his composure, stepped in quickly, his hand fluttering toward Emily's shoulder. "Mr. Steele, please, Emily is an excellent employee, though perhaps a little overread on the artist files. She meant no offense." He tried to usher Emily away, effectively sweeping the embarrassing moment under the expensive Carrara marble rug. Emily allowed herself to be guided a step or two, but the humiliation had burned away the embarrassment, leaving only a white-hot core of rage and clarity. She looked back at Mr. Steele, who was now preening slightly, confident in his victory and the reaffirmation of his superior status. The dismissal hurt more than any sharp critique of her artwork ever could. It was a challenge, a barrier, and an outright insult to her life's most meaningful pursuit. She had been silent for so long, and this was the price of her first whisper. "He thinks I know nothing," she thought, her hands now clenched at her sides. "He thinks I am just dust." She turned away, but the encounter was far from over. Mr. Steele, still basking in his dominant moment, had one final, sarcastic and ultimately foolish move to make. A move that would inadvertently give Emily exactly what she needed: a stage. Mr. Steele felt the adrenaline of the public takedown coursing through him. He had silenced the assistant, reaffirmed his dominance, and now stood on the high ground, basking in the nervous energy of the onlookers. But silencing Emily wasn't enough. He needed to turn the humiliation into an absolute, theatrical defeat. He wanted to eradicate any lingering doubt about his judgment and, more importantly, about the inherent superiority of his class over her competence. His eyes, still fixed on Emily's flushed face, drifted toward a small, roped-off area across the wing. This was the gallery's modest, rarely used educational workshop. A small studio space where visiting artists occasionally gave master classes or where children of wealthy collectors sometimes held private, supervised painting sessions. It contained a few wooden easels, a shelf of sealed pigments, and a stack of virgin, primed canvases. It was the perfect stage for his final act of condescension. A slow, self-satisfied smile stretched across his lips. It was a smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. "You know, Vance," Steele began, addressing the gallery owner but keeping his voice loud enough for the entire group to hear, "I might have been too harsh. Perhaps the little document carrier truly does have artistic vision. She certainly has an opinion." Mr. Vance, catching the dangerous shift in Steele's tone, tried to intervene. "Mr. Steele, please, let's move on to the Warhol room. This is unnecessary." Steele ignored him, his gaze drilling into Emily. "No, Vance. Necessary. She speaks of technical difficulty and sensory deprivation. She understands gesso and carbon black. That suggests more than mere reading. Perhaps she is a secret genius, a Mozart of the administrative filing cabinet." He punctuated the title with another brittle, dismissive laugh. He then took a few purposeful strides toward the workshop area, the polished click of his expensive Italian shoes echoing against the marble. He pulled back the velvet rope and, with a flourish that was pure stagecraft, pointed to a blank canvas sitting on a sturdy wooden easel. "If you know so much, assistant," Steele challenged, his voice laced with the heavy syrup of sarcasm, "then show us. Don't just stand there quoting Wikipedia entries on pigment. Prove it." He walked to the supply shelf, grabbed a box of high-quality acrylic paints, the kind Emily could only dream of affording for her own work, and a large, pristine museum-grade canvas, pulling it out and slapping it onto the easel. The canvas shimmered, dazzlingly white under the gallery lights. "Here," he said, sweeping his hand over the materials. "I'm a man who believes in meritocracy. You have the materials, you have the space, and you have an audience of highly refined, extremely wealthy critics. Show us your genius. Show us a piece that validates your opinion and invalidates mine." He stepped back and crossed his arms, the very picture of arrogant patience. "I'm sure you're no better than a child with finger paints, but I will give you 5 minutes to prove me wrong. 5 minutes to show us what art even is." The audacity of the challenge was breathtaking. It was a public gauntlet thrown down with the clear intention of forcing her to fail, thereby cementing the idea that talent was reserved for those who could afford it, not those who possessed it. The entire atmosphere of the gallery shifted instantly from high-stakes commerce to a bizarre, forced spectacle. The small crowd, the patrons, the nervous art blogger, and even the gallery security, turned their full, focused curiosity toward the assistant and the blank canvas. They were hungry for drama, for the fall, for the unique thrill of watching a social hierarchy being brutally enforced in real time. Emily felt the eyes of a dozen strangers drilling into her, magnifying the shame and the pressure. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. Her mind was a dizzying rush of conflicting thoughts. Run. Leave the gallery right now. It's the only way to salvage your dignity. If you refuse, he wins completely. He'll tell everyone you backed down because you were a fraud. If you fail, your name will be mud, and you'll lose the job you desperately need. If you succeed. The thought was too terrifying, too exhilarating to fully form. Mr. Vance, now sweating visibly, hissed at her from the side. Emily, don't be foolish. Step away. This is a trap. But the challenge had pierced through Emily's professional veneer and struck the core of her identity. Steele had done more than humiliate her job. He had dismissed her entire secret life, the hours of solitude and sweat she dedicated to her passion. His sneering dismissal, "An assistant like you has no idea what art even is," echoed in her ears louder than the silence. She glanced at the paints, rich, viscous pigments in tubes of impossible clarity. She looked at the canvas, a smooth, brilliant field of potential begging to be claimed. It wasn't just about proving him wrong anymore, it was about affirming herself. It was about the integrity of the art she defended, the honesty of the process she revered, and the talent she had kept hidden for too long. Her hands, which had been clenched, slowly relaxed. A strange, cold calm began to settle over her. She knew the trap was set, but she realized that the materials he had thrown at her were the very tools of her rebellion. Steele waited, a smug predator enjoying the slow agony of his prey. Well, assistant? 5 minutes is ticking. Or do you confess that your critiques are just empty noise? Emily took a deep, steadying breath, letting the shame drain away, leaving only a core of fierce, determined pride. She straightened her spine, pulling her focus inward. Her eyes didn't look at Mr. Steele or the crowd, they were fixed solely on the blank canvas. It was no longer a stage for her humiliation, but a portal to her truth. She began to walk toward the easel. Her steps were slow, deliberate, and entirely unexpected. The crowd held its collective breath, the air thick with anticipation. The moment the document carrier reached the paints and the canvas, the story would irrevocably change. She had accepted the mocking challenge. The silence of the brush was about to be broken. Emily's walk to the easel felt like traversing a chasm, each step measured against the weight of 1,000 scrutinizing eyes. The brilliant white of the canvas seemed to glow, a beacon or a trap depending on the angle of her terror. Her pulse pounded in her ears, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the room. She could feel Mr. Steele's smug gaze, a physical weight on her back, silently daring her to fail. "This is a mistake," a voice in her head screamed. "You will humiliate yourself. You will lose everything." She paused before the easel, her hand hovering over the array of paint tubes Mr. Steele had provided. Her reflection, a distorted figure in the polished gallery floor, seemed to waver. She was torn between the crippling embarrassment, the fear of public failure, and a deep, simmering anger that had been simmering beneath her professional facade for years. Then a memory, soft and insistent as a whisper, broke through the cacophony of her fears. It was of her mother, Eleanor, a woman who had never owned an expensive artwork but had seen art in everything. Eleanor, a textile artist by trade, had taught Emily to paint on repurposed bedsheets and scrap wood, using house paint and salvaged brushes. Their tiny kitchen table in Queens was often covered in a glorious mess of color. Emily was about 7, struggling with a particularly stubborn watercolor. The colors bled, the lines blurred, and frustration welled up in her, hot tears blurring her vision. "It's not good enough, Mama," she'd sobbed, ready to crumple the paper. "I can't do it." Eleanor had knelt beside her, her hands stained with dye and paint, gently guiding Emily's small fingers back to the brush. "Emmy, my love," she'd said, her voice warm and firm, "talent isn't about perfection. It's about honesty. It's about pouring your true self onto the canvas, messy bits and all. Don't ever let anyone tell you your voice isn't worth hearing. And don't you ever, ever, let yourself be ashamed of who you are, or what you create. Take pride, little artist. Take pride, little artist." The words resonated through Emily, pushing back against the humiliation. Eleanor had taught her that art wasn't about gallery prices or critical theory, but about raw, unapologetic expression. It was a sacred act, a conversation between the soul and the canvas. And Mr. Steele, with his contemptuous dismissal, had insulted not just Emily, but the very essence of that sacred act. A cold, determined resolve began to replace her fear. She wasn't just doing this for herself, she was doing it for her mother's memory, for every artist who had been told their work was worthless, for every dream suppressed by arrogance and elitism. She looked at Mr. Steele, who was still smirking, his arms crossed, expecting her retreat. The crowd, a silent, expectant jury, waited for her collapse. A slow, empowering burn began in Emily's gut. The humiliation was still there, a sharp echo, but it was being subsumed by a furious, exhilarating rebellion. She had been invisible for too long. She had been silenced for too long. Now, with the very tools her tormentor had provided, she would speak. With a sudden, decisive movement, Emily reached for a large, flat brush, not the fine detail brushes but a wide, aggressive one. She bypassed the bright, primary colors and went straight for the deep, rich cadmium red. She squeezed a generous dollop onto a small palette, its intense crimson bleeding against the pure white. Then she dipped the brush. The bristles, stiff at first, softened as they absorbed the viscous paint. It felt familiar, utterly right, like a forgotten limb finally reawakening. The scent of acrylics, sharp and chemical, was a counterpoint to the more organic oils she preferred, but it was still the scent of creation. She lifted the brush, her eyes now completely focused on the canvas. The smooth, pristine surface no longer seemed intimidating. It was an invitation, a challenge, a silent confidant waiting to receive her truth. The room, the crowd, Mr. Steele, all faded into an indistinct blur at the edges of her vision. There was only Emily, the brush, the red paint, and the stark white canvas. Her first stroke was not hesitant. It was a declaration. With a sudden, almost violent motion, she slashed the brush across the bottom third of the canvas. The cadmium red exploded across the white, a thick, visceral line that was jagged, furious, and undeniably present. It wasn't polite, it wasn't neat, it was raw emotion, unbridled and fierce. It was the color of her shame, her anger, and her long-suppressed passion, finally unleashed. A gasp, barely audible, rippled through the onlookers. They had expected tentative, amateurish strokes, perhaps a self-conscious attempt at a still life. They had not expected this assertion. Emily ignored them. Her hand, guided by a force that felt both intensely personal and universally artistic, moved again. She grabbed a tube of titanium white, squeezing it directly onto the wet red, then plunged the brush back in, twisting and dragging the colors together. The white fought the red, creating streaks of hot pink and pale rose, a violent, beautiful collision of light and fury. She wasn't painting a picture, she was painting a feeling. The overwhelming pressure, the dismissive words, the years of silent longing, it all poured out onto the canvas. Her movements were no longer careful or composed. They were a dance, a struggle, a release. She began to work with incredible speed, almost manic in her concentration. She abandoned the brush for a moment, using a palette knife to scrape and drag the paint, building texture, creating canyons and peaks of color. Then, with her bare fingers, she smudged and smeared, blending and blurring, letting her body become a direct conduit for the emotions erupting within her. Her hair, usually tightly pulled back, escaped its confines, a few strands falling across her face. A small smudge of red paint appeared on her cheek, a war mark. She was no longer the prim, invisible assistant. She was an artist, stripped bare of pretense, consumed by her craft. The canvas, moments ago a pristine field of nothingness, was rapidly transforming. It was becoming a landscape of the soul, a visceral, abstract portrait of anger, resilience, and the defiant beauty of a hidden talent finally breaking free. Mr. Steele's mocking challenge had become her desperate, glorious stage. The silence was not just broken, it was shattered, replaced by the furious whisper of the brush. The gallery, moments ago a chamber of condescending critique and escalating tension, was now enveloped in a profound, thick silence. It wasn't the usual hushed reverence for art, it was a silence born of awe and shock. The only sound was the rhythmic scrape of the palette knife, the whisper of the brush against the canvas, and the sharp, irregular intake of Emily's own ragged breath. Mr. Steele's smug grin had vanished. He stood utterly motionless, his arms still crossed, but the posture no longer conveyed dominance. It was a pose of frozen disbelief. He had demanded a performance for her humiliation. He was now witnessing an act of pure, unadulterated creation that was rapidly undermining his entire premise. Emily was no longer aware of him, the crowd, or the consequences. She was deep within the creative vortex, a place where time warps and the self dissolves into the work. The canvas was no longer merely a surface, it was a battlefield of color, and she was the relentless general fighting the years of bottled-up frustration. She moved with an astonishing economy of motion. Her years of painting in the small confines of her apartment, learning to maximize every inch of space and every drop of paint, had honed her technique to a terrifying efficiency. She used her whole body, swaying and lunging, her strokes not just from the wrist, but from the shoulder, injecting raw physical energy into the paint. After the initial burst of cadmium red, she introduced a field of deep, almost violent indigo, a color that she smeared into the red with the edge of a credit card she'd pulled from her suit pocket. This created a tension, a struggle between the fire of anger and the cold, internal depth of her solitude. Then, with a quick, intuitive move, she used her thumb to drag a single narrow arc of brilliant chrome yellow across the center, a fleeting spark of hope or defiance slashing through the darkness. It was an abstract portrait not of a face but of a feeling, the feeling of being crushed and then rising. The spectators were mesmerized. Their initial curiosity had morphed into genuine fascination. They weren't looking at an administrative assistant making a foolish mistake. They were watching a masterclass in emotional intensity. The sheer speed, the audacity of her color choices, and the authoritative way she manipulated the thick impasto layers commanded respect. The nervous art blogger, whose job was to document the most important happenings in the NYC art scene, quietly took out his phone. He wasn't taking a picture of Mr. Steele's expense account. He was recording the silent, furious creation unfolding before them, a look of stunned excitement on his face. Mr. Vance, the gallery owner, slowly lowered his hands from his face. He was staring at Emily, seeing her, truly seeing her, for the first time. He saw the precision in her chaos, the inherent structure in her abstract shapes. He was witnessing talent that had been hiding right under his nose, masked by a charcoal suit and a diligent work ethic. The talent wasn't just good, it was unconventional, fearless, and utterly compelling. Mr. Steele, forced to confront the truth, could only stare. His mind, trained for numbers and quantifiable assets, struggled to process the unquantifiable force before him. He searched for the flaws, the amateur moves, the signs of a child's hand, but they weren't there. What he saw was confidence. He saw skill. He saw the very sweat and hours of effort that he had loudly declared necessary for true art, but which he believed only he had the right to judge. The painting wasn't just good, it was a devastating, silent rebuke of his words in Chapter 3. It was screaming, "I know exactly what art is and you don't." For nearly 4 solid minutes, Emily worked, the concentration line between her eyebrows the only sign of the immense effort. She didn't seek perfection, she sought completion. She knew exactly when the tension in the canvas was at its maximum, when the emotional chord had fully vibrated. Then she stopped. She stepped back with a final, deliberate movement. Her breath rushed out in a long, shuddering exhale. Her eyes, blinking rapidly to adjust to the presence of the room again, looked at the canvas, a riot of textures and colors, a stunning depiction of defiance. It was finished. The silence lingered for a beat, 2 beats, 3. A dramatic pause where the audience held its collective breath, absorbing the raw, explosive energy still radiating from the wet paint. Emily slowly placed the palette knife and the brush down onto the wooden easel. They landed with a soft, final clack. It was the sound that broke the spell. The sound of the tools hitting the easel was the cue. The moment Emily stepped fully away, putting a definitive distance between herself and the canvas, the spell that had held the marble art house captive shattered. The collective silence of the crowd was instantly replaced by a sound far more powerful and unexpected: applause. It began tentatively, a few claps from the far corner by the security guard, quickly joined by the nervous art blogger. Then it swelled into a robust, prolonged, and utterly enthusiastic ovation. It wasn't polite gallery clapping. It was the spontaneous, visceral approval reserved for a true, unexpected spectacle. People cheered, they whistled, and they openly murmured their astonishment. Emily stood there, her body vibrating with exhaustion and relief, watching the scene unfold as if from a great distance. The red paint smudge on her cheek felt like a badge of honor. Mr. Vance, snapping out of his stupor, quickly moved toward the painting, a look of feverish calculation replacing his earlier panic. He didn't see an employee's impulsive outburst, he saw a market opportunity. But before Vance could speak, a new voice cut through the applause, a voice that carried the weight of established authority. Brilliant. The word came from a woman who had been standing discreetly near the entrance. A woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, an impeccably tailored avant-garde suit, and a small gold-plated press badge. It was Eleanor Roth, one of the most respected and notoriously difficult art critics in New York City, known for making or breaking careers with a single brutal review. Her presence at the gallery today was a rare event, entirely unnoticed until this moment. Eleanor Roth approached the painting, ignoring the crowd and Emily alike, focusing solely on the canvas. She circled the work slowly, her expression intense. The crowd fell silent again, recognizing the gravity of her attention. Finally she turned, her gaze sweeping over the audience, eventually resting on the triumphant canvas. "This piece," she announced, her voice strong and clear, "is not polite. It is not packaged. It does not fit the predetermined aesthetic boxes of this gallery's usual acquisitions." She paused, letting her words hang. "It is, however, an expression of raw, honest genius." She pointed specifically to the intersection of the furious red and the cold indigo. "Look at the tension here. The artist has used a palette knife and the blunt force of emotion to create a texture that screams of conflict, yet the single line of yellow at the center provides a fleeting moment of defiant hope. This is not derivative. This is not imitation. This is a true, singular, and necessary voice responding to a real-world insult. The subject is not the paint, but the pressure of invisibility, a theme immediately recognizable to anyone who has ever felt overlooked." Her words were definitive, an instant validation that elevated the spontaneous sketch into a recognized work of art. The art blogger immediately began typing furiously, the headline writing itself, "Roth declares marble art house assistant a genius." All eyes turned to the man who had orchestrated this entire event. Mr. Richard Steele had gone from a portrait of arrogant certainty to one of utter, deflated humiliation. He had expected a meek refusal or, at best, a clumsy failure that he could mock into oblivion. He had received a public, masterful defeat, orchestrated by the person he had literally called nothing. He shifted his weight, his expensive suit suddenly feeling constricting, his face a mottled, pale red. The high price of the rejected ether triptych now seemed irrelevant compared to the social currency he had just lost. Eleanor Roth, noticing him, offered a slight, knowing smile. "I believe," she said dryly, still addressing the crowd, "that this piece should be titled, 'The Cost of Underestimation.' And perhaps the person who mocked the artist's understanding of art might now understand the true value of talent, regardless of the bank account or the title." The implication was clear, delivered with a precision sharper than any of Emily's palette knives. Finally Mr. Steele managed to speak, his voice reduced to a low, choked murmur, a pale shadow of his earlier booming arrogance. He couldn't meet Emily's eyes. He stared at the floor, defeated. I didn't expect that," he muttered. It was the only admission of error he could muster, and it was a devastating concession. The man who saw everything in dollar signs had been genuinely surprised by something priceless. Mr. Vance, sensing the immediate shift in power dynamics, quickly stepped forward, placing a proprietary hand on the canvas frame, a gesture that made Emily instinctively flinch. "Emily, my dear girl? Unbelievable!" Vance exclaimed, his voice dripping with newly discovered enthusiasm. "I knew you had talent. I mean, your organizational skills were always so artistic. This is magnificent. A masterpiece. Mr. Steele, this changes everything. This piece is now officially not for sale, but the artist is now highly sought after." The hypocrisy was thick, but the moment of victory belonged to Emily. She had been the document carrier, the assistant, the one who knew nothing. Now she was the focus of the room, the subject of a critical declaration, and the cause of a wealthy magnate's public downfall. The roles had been utterly beautifully reversed. Her gaze finally met Mr. Steele's. She offered him no triumphant sneer, no superior smile. Just a quiet, composed look that communicated one thing: you were wrong. The aftermath of Emily's 5-minute revolution was not a slow fade but a whirlwind. The once hushed, transactional atmosphere of the marble art house was now electric, buzzing with genuine excitement. The painting, still glistening with wet paint, had been carefully moved to the center of the showroom, no longer a sarcastic challenge but the highlight of the evening. A velvet rope was quickly placed around it, this time not to protect it from the common touch, but to protect the integrity of the raw genius it contained. Mr. Vance, fully realizing the seismic shift in his gallery's fortunes, became a man reborn. He was no longer the arrogant employer but a fervent salesman and sudden champion. He worked the room, recounting the moment of confrontation with dramatic flair, conveniently omitting his own efforts to silence Emily. "I knew it. I always sensed that under the administrative polish was a raw, defiant spirit," he exclaimed to a knot of impressed collectors, gesturing wildly at the canvas. The truth, of course, was that he had only valued her silence and efficiency, but the new narrative was too profitable to ignore. Emily, however, remained quietly composed amidst the chaos. The fierce energy of the painting had been spent, replaced by a profound, centered calm. She accepted the flood of compliments, the insistent requests for business cards, and the frantic attempts by the art blogger Julian to secure an exclusive interview, all with a serene dignity that contrasted sharply with the night's earlier volatility. The most meaningful interaction, however, came from Eleanor Roth. The critic approached Emily, not with effusive praise, but with professional respect. "That was a brilliant piece of theater, Miss Carter," Roth said, her gaze intense. "More importantly, it was brilliant art. You didn't just paint your anger, you channeled it into structural force. That takes courage and it takes control. Do you have a portfolio?" "Only the canvases leaning against the wall in my apartment," Emily admitted, a slight smile touching her lips. "Good," Roth replied, pulling a thick business card from her cuff. "Keep them away from people like Vance for now. You have an original voice. Don't let the market dilute it. Call me tomorrow. I want to see everything." This was the true validation. Not the applause, not Vance's sudden admiration, but the serious interest from a critic whose opinion she genuinely valued. A moment later, Mr. Vance returned, his face flushed with the prospect of immense profit. He placed a hand on Emily's shoulder, a gesture that no longer felt dismissive but possessive. "Emily, darling, you have to stay. This is incredible. We're changing your title immediately. Assistant Curator of Emerging Talent. And we will begin preparing your first solo exhibition here, in the very room where you created your masterpiece. We can call it the Carter Collection. What do you say?" Vance's offer was everything the old Emily had once secretly dreamed of: instant validation, a title, a show in a prestigious New York gallery. It was the perfect, comfortable entry into the art world. But the new Emily, the one still vibrating with the memory of the brush's rebellion, saw the offer for what it was: a gilded cage controlled by the very man who had enabled the culture of underestimation. She remembered Mr. Steele's dismissal, Vance's immediate effort to sweep her away, and the years of being reduced to a function. She reached up and gently moved Vance's hand from her shoulder. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice clear and measured, finally able to speak to him as an equal. "Thank you. It's a generous offer. But I can't accept." Vance blinked, genuinely shocked. "Can't accept? But why? It's your dream." "No," Emily replied, looking around the polished marble room one last time. "My dream isn't to work for this house. It's to create freely, without the weight of expectation or administrative duties. I don't want to be an assistant anything. I want to be an artist." She reached into the pocket of her charcoal suit, the suit of her invisibility, and pulled out her slim, plastic assistant badge bearing her photo and title. She placed it carefully on the edge of Mr. Vance's desk, next to a stack of confidential appraisals she would never have to file. It was a small, quiet gesture, but it was the final, definitive stroke of her rebellion. The assistant was gone. Emily retrieved her small, professional handbag. The eyes of the crowd followed her as she moved toward the exit, no longer sneaking out unnoticed, but commanding attention with every step. She passed Mr. Steele, who stood alone by a column, nursing his wounded pride. She didn't pause, didn't gloat, simply offered him a faint, composed nod that acknowledged the past but dismissed any future hold he might have on her. Stepping out of the marble art house and onto the bustling New York street, Emily took a deep breath. The night air, cold and loud, smelled of exhaust and infinite possibility. She still had to face her rent, her small studio, and the daunting reality of forging a career from a single, explosive performance. But this time she wasn't walking home to a secret life. She was walking home to her actual life. Her talent was no longer dust hidden under marble. It was a visible, undeniable force. She smiled, a genuine radiant smile that reached her eyes. She had proved them all wrong, but most importantly, she had finally, emphatically, proved herself right. The next day she would call Eleanor Roth. Her new beginning had already arrived. Dear viewer, if you've watched up to this point, thank you for your support. I have a small request. If you enjoy my stories, you can subscribe to the channel, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts about the stories in the comments. Enjoy watching. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video.